Hello, everyone, and welcome to the week ahead. I can't imagine how this week must have been for you. It's been quite a powerful and interesting week. This week has been filled with a lot of different emotional currents. And, we start the week ahead right now with the moon in Scorpio. Scorpio has to do with the element of death and rebirth and transformation. It's naturally ruled by Pluto in evolutionary astrology or Mars in more modern or ancient astrology. And Mars is in the sign of Cancer. Right now, Venus and Mars are loosely in a trine, and they work this week towards perfecting that trine. And we have Jupiter in Gemini, with Mercury also moving this week into a trine with Jupiter. And a part of what I've been really reflecting on is just the nature of Jupiter in Gemini, especially since this is the week that Jupiter stations retrograde. It seems to be present everywhere, this phenomenon of duality, which is a quality of the Gemini archetype. Right? Gemini has the ability to be able to hold multiple perspectives. And in a way that can be extremely helpful. Gemini is a naturally curious sign where there's a deep desire to collect information. And of course, Mercury, Gemini's ruler, is in the sign of Libra, in a new phase to the sun and the south node. And that calling that we might have really to understand the nature of our relationships, to understand what's happening in our world, to understand our own inner emotional experience, especially with Venus and Scorpio and Mars and Cancer. The inner dynamic of self is deeply connected to this emotional reality, which might be really challenged right now by everything that's happening in the world. I've experienced in my own family and my personal life and things that have been happening that, kind of cut to the core of the evolutionary dynamics, bringing up immense vulnerability, tenderness, bringing up relationship dynamics that, patterns and things that are deeply calling for healing. And at the same time, I've witnessed in observation of experiences and what's happening in the world, um, that we have, pieces of what I would say reality that are currently surfacing that are expressing in such a deep and profound way. So, for example, I have family that live in Florida that were affected by the hurricane, and there is countless thousands of people who have been impacted by the flooding. That experience happened. Actually, we were on the East Coast just days before the hurricane happened, and that no one, the news media in many ways was warning people that there was going to be this big storm and to prepare and to evacuate. And many people didn't believe, right? Didn't believe because, especially in the more inland areas, it was unusual for there to be that kind of impact by a storm. By the time it made landfall in Florida, crossed all the way over the eastern seaboard to make it from Florida to North Carolina, that is a huge landmass being impacted by this powerful water. And if you look at the transits from the time of the hurricane, it was during the Cancer moon time. And so there's this real, um, impact to the people, mothers, children, families, working people um, who were devastated by what they would have never expected, right? And often with Jupiter Jupiter and Gemini in particular, with Jupiter, there is an expansion, right? And of course, with the Gemini archetype, that can be an expansion of information. It can also be an expansion of the duplicity, right? That we can't necessarily trust everything we think or hear or learn. And with Jupiter, we have to really practice our own discernment around what is truth, right? I've also experienced witnessing um, lies and people's propaganda and things like that surfacing in such a way, but it's believed by many people or it's thought to be something that's true, right? But if you look at it objectively, from an objective sort of fact finding or a fact collecting perspective, there's no way that such things can be true. And so it can create quite a lot of confusion. We have Jupiter, which won't actually exact a square to Neptune until later next year, when it also squares the lunar nodes after they've moved into the sign of um, Pisces and Virgo. But right now, we're in this energy of Jupiter as it's just preparing to station retrograde. And so a lot of what we may experience in the coming months as a result of this, or not necessarily as a result, but as a reflection, I would say, as a reflection of the Jupiter retrograde period, is an internalization and a reevaluation of the way we look at and understand the world. Now, if we think about Jupiter as it's transiting right now, Mercury in the next couple of days is going to be making a trine to Jupiter. And Mercury is also squaring Mars, right? So there's some aspect of our emotional reality, right, which has been deeply dictated by relationships, which might otherwise be being triggered by an absence of underlying truth or an absence of underlying relationship. And, in relationship, if we're not able to meet in the common ground, in a space of communication and forgiveness and um, connection, it becomes very difficult to rectify the places where what I think about you is not reflecting what you think about me, right? And in Libra, we are working with the dynamics of being deeply impacted by the way others perceive us, right? Venus has to do with perception, the way they see us. Do they love us? Are we worthy of, do they care? Do they understand us? And a lot of what the Libra dynamic can bring forward is patterns of pleasing people, suppressing our own needs and desires with respect to making sure and ensuring that we can keep that love. And yet, when those dynamics have been exhausted, what do we have? We only have our ability to be emotionally honest, to be authentic. We only have really in relationship the capacity that others can actually meet us in conversation to flesh out and be honest about what I'm thinking about you versus what you're thinking about me. I took time in this week to write a letter to a family member and respond about something that deeply impacted me and affected a relationship pattern that I've had my entire life, one that's been formative to my own um, capacity and ability to really truly be myself. And in taking that time to do so, I took a stand for my own voice. I was able to reflect the truth of my heart, which is this desire for connection, for a relationship, while simultaneously bringing forward the ideas, the thoughts and beliefs that I was challenged by. And we may be in situations over the next several months where during this Jupiter retrograde period, there's a reevaluation of the way we've thought about things. There's a revealing of things that we thought were true that were not true. There is a revealing of the truth inside of ourselves, really. And so much of our lives, especially where we are dependent on other relationships. For example, like when I was betrayed in my marriage, and when my marriage ended, when the lies came out, um, it was devastating to me psychologically and emotionally because I had believed something to be true that was untrue. And just that was enough to shatter my emotional and psychological reality. And so I had to go through a process of rebuilding trust within myself and acknowledging the ways in which where I had known things that were happening, like known from the inside, had an emotional response or reaction, or been able to know that something was just not right. But later, but I denied that in the face of my belief that things were so. And so when things came to the surface, it was devastating for me. And it took many, I think in ways many years, and I'm still in a continuous process of deepening that trust within myself, which says that, human beings, of course, are fallible. We all make mistakes. We all, I was thinking about how the phrase hurt people, of course. Until we don't have any hurt people on the planet, we won't necessarily hurt people, right? If we come back into a level of healing and unification with others, and if we learn how to repair our relationships to ourselves and to others, if we learn how to deeply love ourselves and others, much of what um, creates chaos and destruction in the world, much of what wounds people, excuse, excuse me, um, will cease to exist. But until such time, we are dealing with the internal repair of it. And I would say part of that internal repair has to do with Chiron. Chiron is currently transiting in the sign of Aries. Mercury this week is going to make an opposition to Chiron. Um, Mars is also going to make a square to Chiron. Let's see, we have the Mercury opposition on Tuesday. There's quite a lot going on Tuesday. Venus and Mars trine one another on Tuesday as well. And the moon in Sagittarius opposes Jupiter on Tuesday as well. But then following that, we'll have Juno opposite Chiron. Juno is the wife of Jupiter. We'll have Jupiter stationing um, retrograde at trine Juno in Libra. We'll have the moon entering Capricorn here and moving towards an opposition to Mars in the coming days. And then we'll see Mars moving towards a square to Chiron. Right? So these places where we've been so deeply hurt, of course, the square is the crisis of consciousness. And what do we do? What do we do with those hurt feelings? How do we deal with them? Are we using them as a means or a vehicle for our own evolution, for our consciousness to change, right? To heal, to grow? Are we using those experiences as a way of seeing our humanness, our humanity? Are we using those experiences as a way to move towards unification? And I don't mean unification like we're all one and, like from a Pisces perspective. I mean unity in our uniqueness, unity in our humanness, right? There's one thing that unites all of us, right? We all come into human form in the same way. Even if you were born through in vitro fertilization or adoption or yeah, there is no robot human that's been created yet. And not to say that it wouldn't be possible, just to say that, like, human beings are still being born in the same way, even if the identity structure around what is happening is different, even if the function or the role of how it's happening is different. And so we're all then having this humanness, this human experience, not at the same level of consciousness, though. There is a big distinction in evolutionary astrology where they're saying, first you're looking at the natal chart, Pluto and its natal position, the north and south nodes of the moon, the lunar nodes, which for us transiting are in Aries and Libra, the moon as the ego structure and the identity, um, all the other planets and their position in relationship to those core factors. However, the stage of consciousness matters, right? Because I'm looking at the chart of the present moment. This chart includes all of us, every single person on planet Earth, not all from the same perspective, not all, right? We're not all having the same experience. I happen to be where I am. I'm looking at the chart from a locational perspective. You are where you are. You could be completely different place in the world. And the aspects of what's happening in the present moment is affecting each and every one of us from our unique human soul perspective. So, one of the things I've been hearing a lot throughout the weekend, I've been hosting the EA online conference. And we've done 3 full days of lectures. I'm about to jump in to the 4th day, the concluding day. I've heard the term evolutionary necessity repeated over and over again this weekend by teachers. And it's being used to refer to the experience of why things happen to us, whether traumatic, catastrophic, fated, whatever it is, that are difficult to explain on a human level, right? When we look at the catastrophic damage of North Carolina, for example, at this moment, or we look at an experience in your life, say, of extreme hurt, betrayal, abandonment, if we look at a illness that we experience that is devastating, if we look at a loss, right? Why, when women give birth to a stillbirth child after many months of gestating and preparing their family, like it's devastating. Can't even imagine. Sorry. When we experience these experiences on a human level, there's so much grief. And this term evolutionary necessity is talking about something that happens because without such an experience, the soul would not otherwise choose to grow. And when I look at places like that experience extreme devastation, for example, one of the things that always inspires me is the stories of human kindness, stories of everyday, regular people coming out of their homes and in the face of devastation, chaos, choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to be helpful, and they're not thinking about, well, do you share the same religious beliefs as me, or do you have the same opinions or attitudes? There is just human kindness. serving human kindness. And in a way, there's a unification that happens in those experiences because you could call it altruism or, you know, generosity. Humanity comes forward and people serve people, right? There's a repair of relationship that happens that has not that same sense of separation that seems to uh, keep us isolated when we are living in our regular lives and thinking about things the way that we have continued to think about things. And so when I think about this evolutionary necessity, when we cross particular thresholds in our life, when we experience difficult or challenging dynamics coming to the surface, and something is happening to catalyze a change that we might otherwise not initiate for ourselves. You know, the hero doesn't initiate itself on the journey. It is initiated. It And I talked about this maybe in the last week I had the difference in the Persephone stories of whether she was kidnapped or whether she chose. And, how we choose to take the empowered perspective around what's happening in our life can be just that, right? Are we the victim of what's happening to us or in our lives, in our relationships, in our communities, in the world? Or is it a part of the evolutionary necessity that is impelling our souls to grow? And the impelling of soul growth happens at all levels of consciousness. We all just will deal with it relatively differently. But I think it holds the function of doing one thing unanimously, which is that it pressurizes the soul to grow in and through its current level of consciousness. So, if we live in consensus state of consciousness or individuated, these are the three stages: consensus, individuated, and spiritual. And there are different levels within those three stages. But if we are at a soul perspective, readying ourselves for a deep transformation, readying to become something that's latent inside of our soul, we're going to naturally be pushed through one of those levels of consciousness, which will mean the departure from the known and the familiar, which will mean not being able to about our lives the way that we used to think about our lives, which will mean being forced to face internal and relationship dynamics that we may have suppressed for a lifetime. And it also means that we are facing an evolutionary necessity for change that is ultimately bringing us to the next stage of our own development. Evolutionary necessity is akin to the caterpillar having no will to be able to stop the evolutionary process once in the cocoon. And it naturally would have created out of an impulse that cocoon because of its known internal guidance that it is time for something else. However, once in that cocoon, there's nothing to be done except to surrender to the process until on the other side, right? Until readiness for emergence has happened. And if that process is disturbed, it would be destructive to both the caterpillar life and the potentiality of the butterfly. We end this week with Mercury in the last degrees of Libra, making its exact square to Pluto. And I can tell you, when I was deeply challenged when the moon passed through that place, so I wouldn't be surprised if there were more, but the more in this case is going to be respective of our ability to meet what's happening in our life from a consciousness of evolutionary necessity, from a perspective that this isn't happening to me. I'm not being punished by some god in the sky. I'm not, the things that might be hurt or wounded, right? We end this week with the Mars squaring Chiron, the wounds of our past that are surfacing. And with Mars and Cancer, these can be like prenatal wounds. They can be the wounds of our mother and our father. These can be generational wounds, ancestral wounds. These can be the things that we've been carrying for a lifetime that have been playing out in our relationship that just from an evolutionary necessity perspective, we have the choice with our own free will whether we cooperate or resist with what is happening. And of course, the empowered perspective, the healed perspective sees multiple views. And just like in that, duplicity, there is the choice of fear or love, right? In our mind, we always have that choice to align with fear and all the different expressions of fear, or to align with love and all the different expressions of love. And I think with Jupiter retrograde at this stage, we will be weeding out the information, the thoughts, the relationships, the dynamics, the consciousness that actually no longer serves our being able to live in a duplicitous world. In a duplicitous way, we can't take the opportunity for this evolution without choosing a path, and without choosing a path that from our own inner knowing is the most true to our soul. So uh I would say, you know wow, it's been a very tender week, and it doesn't look like it's any less tender in the week ahead. However, I get a lot of hope from the idea that evolutionary necessity is happening and that we all have an opportunity to choose love in a greater way than ever before. And ultimately, choosing love means choosing truth, you know, with a capital T, not an infomercial version, not not the hypocrisy that about love that we might be taught or shown by others, but the real choice within our own soul, um, to know who we are. And that's, I think, some of the hardest work because there can be so much confusion in the mind about what that is or who that is or how we live that way, right? How do we actually choose to live that way in our relationships, especially in the face of sort of difficult power dynamics or suppressed information or, you know, things coming to the surface that have just been latent and kind of growing for some time, but we've been unaware of our own patterns or the patterns of others have been impacting us, and we've been unable to actually speak to it in a way that is about returning us to our unity. And my teacher, Shiloh Sophia, in our recent painting class, she said something about finding our sovereignty amidst our unity. And I really do think that's the balance, especially of this Leo Aquarius space. It's the balance of I am a sovereign individual born into this life with my own soul path and my own destiny. And that is unique to me. Many of us might share collectively, and I think when you resonate deeply with me and what I'm saying, it's because we have this shared field. We have this shared archetypal experience, and there's no human being on the planet who hasn't experienced some of the things that I've experienced. And so often when I'm offering reflections, it's coming from this place where you're also experiencing this too, and that's where we can feel seen and met in each other. And at the same time, even though our experience is sovereign and individual, you're going through what you're going through in your own life, in your own relationships, it is unified. There is no separation on this planet. That is real. We all impact one another. All levels of consciousness impact all other levels of consciousness. All minds, all people, all human beings. You know, there's that phrase that says when a butterfly flaps its wings in one part of the world, it has a cataclysmic effect on the other side of the world. That is true of the very nature of our being. That's how interwoven we are. And yet we're mostly unaware of it as we're going throughout our day or making decisions or struggling in the things where we might feel alone, where we might feel unseen, or where we might not yet have resolution in those relationship areas, where we might be still dealing with the impact of our own evolutionary necessity. And the emotional body is where that evolution happens. So the more that we can do to feel um, connected to ourselves and connected to others as we experience what we're experiencing, the more we can recognize our unity in what we are. I mean, this is why I think people are able to band together in disasters and help one another. Whereas before, boundaries of race, religion, um, economic status would have kept us inside of our houses and away from the real intimacy and vulnerability of our humanness. So, I hope that you have a beautiful and blessed week ahead and that these things that you're facing in your own life come to a point of healing, come to a critical mass in that evolutionary necessity that allows you to grow and emerge in a new way this week with greater strength, emotional strength, physical strength, um, and a deep inner self trust and commitment that allows you to know who you truly are. So, as always, my friends, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for being here. I love hearing your voices. So, if there's something that touched you or something you're experiencing, please leave it in the comments or even just leave me a little emoji. Um, Prayers for healing. I'm getting over a cold that has just been with me for far too long since um the first eclipse, the full moon in Pisces, and it's just not leaving. And so if you could send me some good healing energy that this leaves my body and I am restored to health, I would so appreciate that. All right, everyone, have a beautiful week and bye for now.